Okay. First, Lois, we would like to hear a little bit about your background, just a brief little bit of history, what motivates you, what are your ideals. This is just a little bit of a background of
Yeah.
you and who you are.
Though those of you who know me know that it's very hard for me to be brief, although I have been known to talk in bullet points from time to time, not the dangerous kind, but but briefly. But I'm from suburban Detroit, Michigan, and where I grew up, there were sometimes there were even all the roads were not paved, and there was fields and forests all around us, and there were relatives, grandparents, aunts, uncles, longtime family friends that lived within walking distance. So it was always easy to run away from home. And then my father was a home developer, and so he was developing some new homes for particularly for returning veterans from World War II. And what happened at a very young age is that he was going to take down some trees to build some new homes. So my sister, 2 years my senior, and I got in front of the bulldozers, and we said, Daddy, you cannot take down trees. We were already knew that we had to not take down trees necessarily. And Dad got it. And for that and for the rest of his 70-year career, building career, he never took down unnecessarily any trees as he built these homes for mostly in the early days returning veterans. But that was a big one for us, and I didn't realize how important it was till I was like in later adulthood that had been such an influence.
You
And
had a,
also
you had
running
a,
in and out of relatives' homes, could run away from home, always had someone to run away to as a child, grandparents, aunts and uncles, so forth. So that was, I think, very much in the back of my mind when, along with a lot of other things that were at the root of getting Eco Village started. So did you want to say, interrupt me? Please, anytime, just
yeah,
dig
no,
in.
no, no, that's good. That's good. Could you condense your ideals, your sort of social, political, ecological ideals, just, in a brief way? Can you kind of crystallize those ideals for us? What are your real values?
Well, we with the Los Angeles Eco Village intentional community back in 2001, we created a set of core values which pretty much have remained intact since for these past 20 years. I think we added one additional one, but I think these values are mostly values that most people in eco communities hold to some extent, and I'll I'll roll them off to you. There's a lot to say about each one, but essentially celebrate and include, and these are aspirational values.
Sure.
If we were manifesting all these values all the time, we would not be on earth, we'd be saints in heaven.
Yes. Let's hear them. Go ahead.
But there's aspirational. Celebrate and include joy in all of our endeavors. Take responsibility for each other and the planet through local environmental and social action. And that's really key. That's very strong here in Eco Village. Learn from nature and live ecologically. Build a dynamic community through diversity and cooperation. Inspire compassionate, nurturing, and respectful relationships. Create balanced opportunities for individual participation and collective stewardship, and engage our neighbors and the broader communities in mutual dialogue to learn, teach, and act. And so that means learn from one another, because we have as much to learn from them as they may have to learn from us, and that we teach one another what we have in that respect, and take action. So we have quite an activist community, and many of our 40 of the 40 members within our intentional community are very involved in social activism, environmental activism, eco-justice issues, racial justice issues, and a whole lot of that sort of thing. They're out oftentimes joining demonstrations, writing letters, signing petitions, and so forth.
Okay,
So
we're gonna
that's
get to that. We'll get to that eventually. That's part of what we want to know also. Okay, so now we want to hear a little bit of the history of Los Angeles Eco Village. And when you look at the Google image of LA Eco Village, which you can see here, this is a very urban location. Tell us a little bit about the site here, Lois, and how did you choose this site?
Well, I had moved into the neighborhood in 1980, the year I started our organization known as CRISP, which we are now rebranding to the Los Angeles Eco Village Institute. But in 1980, where there was not even a glimmer in my eye, and I was not even an environmental activist at all at that time, I just was in love with the idea of cooperatives. So CRISP stood for Cooperative Resources and Services Project, CRSP. And so I moved on the block into a building that was on the, I don't know if you can figure out the directions from here, that was on the southeast corner. Yeah, take your arrow just a little bit down, no, up, back up and to the right. I can't point. Can I? I don't think I can point to it, but
You can.
but across the street, next to the parking lot. I lived in a fourplex that was in the parking lot. When it wasn't a parking lot, it was a fourplex, and it was owned by the Los Angeles Unified School District. And I connived my way into letting them, having them rent me a wonderful unit in that fourplex. And then fought with them for the next 25, 30 years to prevent them from bulldozing the whole neighborhood, but we'll get to that. And so that was where I started out, and that was in 1980. And it was just a resource center for cooperatives. I was what you might call a co-op junkie. You pretty much couldn't have a conversation with me without my turning it into something about cooperatives. And I was very good at it. I'm happy to say I'm no longer a co-op junkie, but I do support the idea of co-ops. So it was probably approaching the mid 80s when I realized that, oh my gosh. Oh wait, you want to go back to our buildings first before I talk about that, Jen, or you want to?
Okay.
I'll get there. So it was probably, no, bring that back up because I'll tell you about those buildings as long as you had it on the screen. We own now we own or control 5 properties, 50 units of permanently affordable housing in 3 multifamily buildings, and then the commercial property on the north end next to the big building. I don't know if you can see the numbers there, but on the north end of the big U-shaped building, there's a 1/4 acre commercial property that we now own as well. So the property across the street next to the parking lot is now a learning garden. Managed by the Beverly, Vermont Community Land Trust, which we facilitated the development of. And the large U-shaped building is 40 units. There's another building adjacent to it on the south, which is 8 units. And then there's a fourplex across the street on the intersection. And there are garages behind that fourplex, one of which is one of our members, Jimmy Lizama, is a bicycle visionary, I should say. He designs and builds bikes and works with youth. And he started also the local bicycle kitchen, which is spread quite enormously in the city and other parts of the country and the world as well. And then the learning garden across the street, the land is still owned by the Los Angeles Unified School District, but it's managed by the Community Land Trust. So essentially we have 3 nonprofit organizations mind, the original developer of the LA Eco Village. And I want to just stress here at the front end that when we talk about the LA Eco Village, we're actually talking about a 2-block neighborhood that goes from where you see the street on the north, which is First Street, all the way to the street on the south, which you can't see, which is Second Street, plus the north-south street that our buildings are on, called Bimini, and the dead-end street that goes off in the T there, and that's White House Place. So those 2 blocks, Bimini and White House Place, comprise the LA Eco Village neighborhood. But the 40 people who have become members of our intentional community, they comprise the Los Angeles Eco Village intentional community that primarily live in the 2 buildings on the left, that building, the courtyard building, and the one adjacent to it on the south.
Sure.
So that's a little kind of background about our buildings. Now, we have over these last 24 years, there's a picture of the front of our big building, bought all of these buildings without any bank loans, I'm happy to say. And of course, this is old news to a lot of you, but we assumed in the very beginning that we would just be like any other nonprofit housing developer, and we would go out and jigsaw monies together from the city and from foundations and from community development banks, and a little bit here and a little bit there. And we did do that, and we did have some nice offers for money, but those offers wanted us to do things to our building that would completely destroy the character of the buildings inside. We have open stairways and hallways, and they wanted fire doors here and there and everywhere. And I said, no, we'll just figure out how to do it. And we had, in the mid 80s, we had started a small loan fund because we wanted to demonstrate a number of different economic possibilities other than the conventional way that people save and use and borrow money. So we considered a credit union, although there were plenty of credit unions, and we considered a local exchange trading system, which in fact we did organize, and it was ongoing for about 10 or 12 years. And we considered an ecological revolving loan fund where we would borrow money from our friends and we would put it into a socially responsible money market fund, which at that time in the mid 80s was Working Assets, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, which is a phone company, I think, today. But we would get interest on the money, we would pass it through to our lenders, and meantime, we'd put it out there that anyone that wants to start a co-op, we have money available. And so we were, every once in a while, we would get an inquiry about, oh, Lois, I want to start a co-op. And then I would tell them, well, find at least 2 or 3 other people that want to do what you want to do, and then begin to essentially meet regularly and do your planning for your future co-op business. And every time you meet, have everyone put in a little money, $5 or $10, and keep track of it. And we can help you with your business plan or get someone to. And then after you've done that for several months, come back and we'll see about a loan. So as I often say, when I tell this story, ask the question, do you think that anyone ever came back? And the answer is 0. No one ever came back after hearing that. So so that was such an important lesson for me. That is how I knew that there was plenty of money to be had out there. And today I still believe that very strongly. And oftentimes people in our movements have something that's come to be known as poverty consciousness. You think that there's no money available when in fact there is tons of money available. And it's a matter of having essentially a clear vision about what you want to do and a good plan, and to be flexible in your plan, because goodness knows we've changed plans many, many times in these 25 plus years. So after a good plan, you want to stay grounded. And fourthly, you want to persevere. Some of us, it takes longer than others. I'll have my
Okay.
80.
Okay. All right. Good. What are we looking at here, Lois? This is the
This
courtyard part of your big building right here.
This is the courtyard of our large building, and there are many small gardens within this courtyard stewarded by different individuals, members of the co-op, and in some cases, 2 or 3 people steward the same plot. There are many, about, I would say, 12 or 15 fruit trees in that courtyard. And the fruit trees are up for grabs. Anyone can harvest from them, and they are very, very prolific.
What's this right here? That's not an avocado tree.
No, that's a magnolia tree.
Magnolia.
That is an old tree that was here when we bought the building. And so, but there are many other fruit trees all around the periphery.
You have you've got a lot of edible landscaping around there.
There's a lot of edible
and a lot of habitat as well.
Oh, yes, indeed we do. And a lot of wonderful, extraordinary community gardeners that get out there fairly regularly and do all kinds of things in groups and individually. I said, after the rain tomorrow, I'm gonna get out there and do some weeding. All right, this is a picture of our, I think about 2 or 3 years ago. Oh, we lost it. Of our intentional community. We have about 40 members. Everyone wasn't there for this picture, but I think it was after one of our retreats, and it was taken in front of our big building. And you can see me bending in the middle, in the front row, kind of bent over. Yeah, that's me. And but you don't see everyone there, but you get a pretty good idea. And that's the picture that's been, I think, oh no, I think it's another courtyard picture that's been on the front page of our website for quite a long time. But
okay. Okay. So just without extreme detail, what have been some of the challenges?
Oh, well, challenges. When we bought our first building, having grown our loan fund to do that, and it was half empty and in slum-like conditions, 40 units. So we essentially had a lot of retrofitting as distinct from just rehabbing this building. It was like eco-retrofitting in a variety of ways. And anyone that said that they wanted to live more ecologically and more cooperatively, they were in. Big mistake. As many of you who have been active in intentional communities or familiar with them know that you need to have a pretty good membership process for vetting people in the community. Like other kinds of businesses, intentional communities pretty much do not survive at the same rate as new small businesses do not survive. Like mostly in the first 3 to 5 years, up to 90% of them go kaput. So of course, full of idealism and a sense of justice and fairness, it's like we will just, anyone that wants to live more ecologically and more cooperatively, we'll just get them a unit retrofitted and they'll move in. Big mistake. The other big mistake I made was as soon as we had just even an inkling of an intentional community, 5, 7, 8 people, I essentially, as my organization as the developer and me as heading up that organization, gave away all my authority. And so in spite of the fact that legally the buck stops here, Emotionally, I pushed it on to everyone else. Unfortunately, everyone else didn't see it that way. Even though I said it, they didn't, necessarily believe that I meant it, because they, I think, probably knew better than me that the buck stops here. And so things were pretty much a mess for about 7 or 8 years, and such a mess that sometimes I would walk out into the lobby and see hate messages on our whiteboard that is supposed to be there to help people know what's going on that week. Or and people were so divided within the community that if they would see someone walking up the hall, they would turn around and walk the other way. There were people that wouldn't speak to one another. All kinds of ugly, ugly stuff. I stuck it out. I don't know how. And the people that really helped set us straight, and that I should have known better because I was on the board of the Foundation for Intentional Communities and had seen the best facilitators in the country and knew a lot of stuff, but didn't practice what I knew. And so essentially, at that point where things were unbearable, we had some fabulous retreat workshop facilitators, including Laird Schaub and Diana Leaf Christian and Tree Bresson. But I think it was after Diana Leaf Christian came and did a workshop with us that she sat around with a group of the more positive people in the community after the workshop, and she just threw up her hands and she said, how do you people stand for that kind of behavior that she had witnessed in our meeting? And then that was kind of a turning point for us. So the positive people were able to essentially get it together to form a conflict resolution team. And we created policy that people in conflict had to come to the conflict resolution team. If they didn't feel comfortable with that, we'd help them get an outside mediator and so forth. And so that was the start of a new era. And after about 8 years of misery for all of us, and many people during that terrible period had left because they didn't want to kind of be involved. This is not atypical of what happens in many communities. Fortunately, several of the positive people stuck it out and are still with us today. And I'm happy to say, and we have a very, very, on a comparative basis, a very congenial group of 40 people, a very long and complex membership process. If you're going to start an intentional community, you need to have a membership process beyond asking people if they want to live more ecologically and more cooperatively.
I can certainly believe that. I lived actually in a more or less intentional community in the Arkansas Ozarks in the later 70s. Oddly, the Ozarks was a real hot spot for the back to the land movement, because land was cheap there. And the scenery just beautiful. And I can relate to just about everything you're saying. Our community did not last too much more after I joined, but it was rural. It was totally rural. But yeah, there has to be clarity and there has to be a vetting process. Absolutely.
Yes. So there we were. Here we are. I think we started on the ground in the neighborhood that we're in now. We started in 1993. We didn't own any property then, but essentially those 3 years until we bought our first building in 1996 were pretty much spent in the neighborhood, organizing, working with kids, planting trees, all fruit trees, planting little veggie gardens around the trees, working with our neighbors, the people who lived in the neighborhood, and the kids that lived in the neighborhood. We went on camping trips. We had a little recycling co-op with the kids in the neighborhood.
Okay, Lois, I'm gonna kind of interrupt for a second. We'll get to the neighborhood shortly. Okay. we want to know about the neighborhood relations, but let's do this first. So hold those thoughts. One of the primary ideals I'm sure that you and all your membership have, and I think probably just about everybody here for this Zoom meeting, is reducing our ecological footprints. So would you just talk just a few minutes about how the co-op, the eco-village, encourages and facilitates people reducing their ecological footprints? And this screen share that I have right here, let's do this. I want to show you a screen share that might help illustrate that particular item. And it is here. So it is community relations, but I see this here, bike, and I've seen some other pictures from your website. There's a lot of bicycle interest. There's you're living much more compactly. You probably share a lot of resources. How are you and your membership reducing your ecological footprints?
Well, I think basically people have a fairly strong environmental consciousness that live here. So in terms of kind of the things that they buy, unfortunately, in this time, one of the major issues in the country today is packaging. So since people are not out so much doing that shopping, but we exchange a lot of services and goods. We have a free shelf, so anyone that has something that is still useful, but they don't want to use it anymore, they can put it on our free shelf and anyone can take it, whether they live here or not. We would say out of 40 adults here, half of them own cars. That's about from my perspective, 15 cars too many. And we're still working on that. But it's a very big bicycling community as well. The people who started, the person who started the Bicycle Kitchen, the LA County Bicycle Coalition, which does bicycle planning for the cities and counties locally. The Cicla Via, which happens in Los Angeles. Two of our members essentially had come back from Bogota and got a hearing with then Mayor Villaraigosa and got him to start Cicla Via, where about 100,000 bicyclists turn up once every 2 months or so, except not during COVID, unfortunately. And it's a car-free event. It's only human vehicles. You cannot have a motorized vehicle in Cicla Via. It's an amazing event. So there's a lot of bicycle culture that has emanated out of Los Angeles Eco Village. The International Bike Conference was held here 3 years ago now, and we had about 400 people for a couple of days here. And so you're seeing a little bit of that there on our commercial property with our 40-unit building in the background there behind the old oak tree. And so people, I think, are very conscious about their electricity. We're very conscious about water use. We now have several 400-gallon cisterns around our two of our buildings. And so this rain is filling them up fast, I'll tell you. And we're gonna have more rain tonight and tomorrow. Also, there are several of us, all of our outdoor water meters are, water faucets have meters on them, and we track the use of our outdoor water use. Of course, all of our indoor toilets are low flow toilets and low flow faucets and shower heads and so forth like that. The light bulbs pretty much in the whole building have been changed to LED lights. I believe in almost all of our lights have been changed. So I think we are also tracking our electrical bills and our gas, not our gas bills at this point. We still have a lot of gas stoves. we have a solar hot water system on our big building, and we have some solar electric systems on our 8-unit building. And let me see, we have a tool shop where everyone shares tools. We have an art and a sewing shop, and we have a gym now in behind our 8-unit building. Then in the former garages, we created all these nice little kind of common use places where, particularly, as I said, the tool shop. And then there are 2 or 3 families that share one of those garages for their bicycles and storage and so forth. So there's a lot of different kinds of share. Anytime anyone needs anything, we have a listserv. They put it out on the listserv, whether it's a cup of sugar or a bottle, whatever it might be, a ride to where, or borrow someone's car. There's a lot of car sharing going on, but still too many cars from my perspective. So there's a lot of sharing, and that definitely reduces our footprint. So we, let me see, I'm sure that there are so many other things that I might not have mentioned, but I think overall the consciousness is what's really important when you're living life as an environmentally kind of aware person. There's a lot of things you don't really think about because you do it kind of automatically.
Yeah.
And so, for example, I noticed that we have 1 3-yard trash bin and 1 3-yard recycling bin that gets picked up once a week by a waste hauling contractor that we have. And I see that oftentimes that black bin for the waste, for the trash, is only half full, sometimes less. And so that's, you know, I hope someday it'll be empty and we'll get rid of it. But for right now, it's still pretty good for a 40-unit building.
Yeah, no, that is, you're educating each other, and you don't have to duplicate so much, so many tools and so many items when you're cooperating that way. So, okay. That is very good. Let's kind of move a little bit back into the neighborhood, your involvement with the larger community. So I think this picture right here is some kind of an event. Tell us a little bit about what this picture is.
Well, I did mention it, and I will again. It was in 2018. It was the International Bike Conference. And so people came from all over the world, as a matter of fact, for this, I think it's a biannual conference. I think the next one is supposed to be in Tijuana, Mexico. And so you're seeing people walking in and out of of where we were holding the events for that, for those 2 days. And, you know, there were workshops, there were public talks, there was food, there was, painting the intersection of our street, which I know you're very familiar with up in the Portland area.
Sure.
We had Mark, in our earlier days, we had Mark Lakeman down to teach us how to do intersection repair. And so they did, we've repainted our intersection 3 times now, since 2005.
Yeah, that's great. So let's then, when I saw this picture here.
Oh yes, this is great.
I just thought, like, this is really nice. So explain this picture here.
Well, this is a wonderful thing. This person who is sitting with the guitar against the fence is one of our former members, but he stayed connected and involved with the organization. He is a wonderful, wonderful musician. His name is Tiago Winterstein. And he's from, I'm going blank on where he's from. Brazil? No, yeah, maybe Brazil, Portuguese. He speaks Portuguese. So he decided to do free music lessons on the sidewalk. which he held religiously every Wednesday afternoon. And anyone could drive by, stop, and come in for a free music lesson, or sometimes people just sang together. And so here you see some of our neighbors coming together for the Wednesday afternoon free music lessons with Tiago. And of course, during COVID, we haven't been doing this. There you go, free music lessons. So he would take the signs out, bring out the chairs, bring out some instruments, and sometimes there'd be 5 or 10 people making music, and sometimes it was wonderful, and sometimes it was interesting. But that's what's happening there.
Yeah, and you were mentioning before, even before you started you took ownership of the buildings, you were having relations with the kids, you were doing gardens here and there around the neighborhood. I've done a little bit of the Google when you're kind of down on the street and you can kind of go down the street and you can look around. You don't live in a glamorous neighborhood right there.
No, we don't, not at
I
all.
think safe to say. And tell us a little bit about some of your relationships, with there's like auto repair shops. What are your relationships with some of the people nearby who probably think you're kind of strange, but they've kind of gotten used to you probably by now? But tell us a little bit about your neighbors.
Well, I would just start out by saying that in our first 3 years, all of our work, as I think I mentioned earlier, was in the neighborhood. And we knew of the 500 people in the neighborhood and the 13 multifamily buildings and 162 units of housing. We knew all the kids in the neighborhood and most of their parents, and we worked with them. And so that was the Eco Village activity, but we became very inward once we bought property because we didn't know what we were doing. And we had to really, I certainly had to kind of learn a lot of stuff and didn't really have time to be out on the streets every single day with the kids and the neighbors. So every once in a while, one of those kids will come by and, I knew him when he was 7 years old and now he's 6'4" and 35 or whatever. And it's, Lois, don't you remember me? My grandma still lives in the neighborhood. I'm visiting her. So there was that in the first 3 years. Nowadays, there are several of us here who are regularly engaged with neighbors. So there's a kind of maybe a dozen people or so that are always saying hi on the sidewalk, or they're gardening adjacent to the sidewalk or the street and will always talk to neighbors walking by, because when you're gardening, neighbors walking by often have something to ask you. And I'll tell you, essentially in the very first years when we were planting so many things, we often would have neighbors that would come by and tell us the uses of some of the plants we were planting that we had no idea about. And so it was always kind of that kind of wonderful exchange of information. We have probably on our 2 blocks, we probably have about 20 different ethnic groups. Wow. And so there was lots of things to learn from our neighbors, both before Eco Village started on the ground and in these past 25 plus years. So nowadays, I think that there are pretty much a lot of people, most people know that they live in a neighborhood called LA Eco Village. Not everyone does, but they know there are those people in the north side of the block that are always kind of, on their bikes or planting something, or sitting in the middle of the street with having a conversation. Or we used to actually have Saturday afternoon teas in the middle of the intersection, and cars would come by and say, what are you crazy people doing in the middle of the street? And we'd say, well, we never get to meet you. You're always in your car. So why don't you park and come have some tea with us? And sometimes they did. And that's how we got to know a lot of neighbors too. And we haven't done this recently, but up until probably a few years ago, we would frequently have Sunday night dinners in the street, adjacent to the, in the street adjacent to the sidewalk. And so we would invite neighbors to join us as they walked by. And sometimes neighbors would cross the street so they wouldn't have to walk by us. You know, so I would say that's the relationships are good. We had a very nasty landlord on our dead end street several years ago who was raising rents illegally, fired their manager, all kinds of ugly stuff. So we essentially invited them and a tenant attorney to come meet in our community room and be able to speak with them in their language about what their rights were. And so we invited all those tenants over that were monolingual with that particular ethnic group. And then the tenant attorney explained what their rights were. They went to court. The landlord was called on the carpet so badly that they sold the building, and the tenants got to stay, and the rents were reduced, and the manager got to come back. So these are, that's a little bit of the kind of social currency that we've earned over the years. So anyone that's in the neighborhood that's been here for any length of time knows that we are problem solvers and that they can pretty much come and ask our advice about anything they need advice about.
Oh, right.
Mm,
And a safe
so,
place for kids and
yeah.
music.
Well, it's not, excuse me, it's not a safe place for kids. It is one of the most dangerous places in the country for kids. We have, our kids in our neighborhoods have about 20% less lung capacity than kids in other cleaner neighborhoods. There are only 5 zip codes in the entire state of California, or 5% of zip codes in the state of California that have worse pollution than we do. So, and we have way too much truck traffic. And that is one business that we are not in a very good relationship with, because we have pleaded with them on many occasions, even having tons of signed petitions to get them to make their deliveries on our main street, on the main street 1 block east of us, instead of on our street. So we still need to work on that, because we have a lot of dangerous trucks lining up, polluting, standing there polluting, double parking. It is not safe for children to be in our street. However, we do have a plan, and that plan is to close down about 300 linear feet of our main street, Bimini Place, from our northern boundary to our dead end street. So that will, within the next few years, be a public plaza and no more through traffic. And we'll definitely get those trucks deliveries on Vermont Avenue, for those of you who know the neighborhood. So anyone that wants to work with us on, I mean, I'm counting on people like our friend Jocelyn, who I see is right under me. Hi, Jocelyn. And some other folks that we know that have relationships or potential relationships with that market owner that can maybe help us communicate a little bit better.
That reminds me of a program in New York City. It's called the Community Plaza program in New York City. This is what's going on now. The biggest community plaza, of course, is Times Square. But around New York City, there's 40, 50, 60 places, a little bit like what you're describing, where the city has a process where people in the neighborhood can actually gather citizen support, the businesses, the churches, the residents, the people who live in the neighborhood, to support the idea of closing off a street to automobiles and turning that underperforming place into a plaza like what you're talking about. I sure hope that happens.
Yeah, well, we do have something similar to that in Los Angeles as well. Streets for People. We've had the People Street program and so people can do that, even if right now there is a big push, not not necessarily to 100% close the street down, but to make it pedestrian friendly
Yeah.
and close off several lanes and close it off to through traffic and only allow residential, you know, the people that live there to come on it. So there's a lot of that going on. And we have actually applied on 2 or 3 different occasions now in the last 15 years to close our street down, and have been rejected because mostly because of businesses that are further south on our block. But now that we control all of the property from our northern through street to our dead end street, with a very small exception of a little piece of a parking lot owned by the school district, we think we have a much better chance of creating the plaza now. Anyone that wants to work with us on that, let me know, and you're in
Well,
like Flint.
this topic is very similar and relates to the next picture that I want to
great.
show.
Let's go.
And that is, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but let's just pretend that these are officials from the city. What's your relationship with the city? Because I'm sure you're doing things there that are like, well, nobody's tried to do this before. You're kind of breaking ground for other people. What's your relationship with the city?
Well, it's for the most part, it's excellent. We have a pretty close working relationship with all of our city council persons of the last 3 of them since the early 90s. They've all been supporters. They've all played a role in saving our neighborhood from the school district bulldozers. And we are, in every case, we're able to find alternative sites for the schools they wanted to build by bulldozing our neighborhood. And so we have some pretty good relations. 3 of my board members are city planners, and one of them retired, came to us as an intern, and now he's retired, which tells you how old I am. And so anyway, I think the group you're looking at right here, we have a lot of interesting public tours. I think this one may have been the one from Taiwan. I'm not sure. It looks like these are, yeah. And we've hosted public jurisdictional tours from all over the world. And here in Los Angeles, the city planning department, the environmental affairs department, when we had one, I'm sure we'll have one again. And many academic tours and so forth. So from graduate classes and architecture from Harvard to, and this is not anything that it's just us that do. Eco villages all over the world have these kinds of tourists coming through their communities on a fairly regular basis. So that's very, very exciting. And I'm sure that the founders circles that we're talking in, and that you'll all learn about other groups that are coming together as founders to talk about what happens in our communities with groups like this. So that's, I'm not sure if you got all the answer you wanted on that question. Our relationship remains excellent with the city for the most part. I think the city Department of Sanitation gave us an award a few years ago for being the best at recycling and reducing trash. And I think one of our former council people who went on to become a state assembly person gave us an award. And so, you know, someday I need to kind of hang those on the wall the way the other normal people do.
Yeah, okay. Well, there's another question that is on your street. You have purchased this business property there at the corner that you've made reference to before. And from what I've read on your website, you're interested to turn this into a neighborhood, some kind of community hub. What's the story?
You got it.
What's the story
You
on
got
that?
it.
Yeah.
It will be a community hub, and it is already in certain ways. So we plan it's a 1/4 acre. It's a former auto shop and an old cafe built in 1925 that was ready to split apart at the first major, the next big earthquake that we know we're going to have. So we decided to deconstruct that small cafe, but save a lot of its materials for repurposing on the site. And then the old auto garage, which is about 2,200 square feet. We plan, and the most exciting thing about this property, there's so many exciting things about it, is that it has the last publicly visible streetcar tracks in the city. And we're going to bring an old streetcar back and put it on those tracks and make it a mini public transportation museum. We think that there's not going to be any problem getting funds for that from our Metropolitan Transportation District. So that we've got someone working on finding us the streetcar, because they don't make them anymore. There they are, those old streetcar tracks.
Yeah.
And so that will jut out into the street. Other plans for the property are to have 8 to 10 tiny houses that will function as an eco-co-op hostel, and where people can come in groups and have an experience, a common experience of urban sustainable living that they can take back to their neighborhoods. We're talking about civic groups, neighborhood council groups, faith-based groups, academic groups, and so forth, where they can experience that as a group in how to live here. And then we also will be having 8 to 10 small business kiosks that are owned by people in the neighborhood, making products and services that are affordable for people in our low income, low to moderate income neighborhood. And so it's like ungentrified small businesses, but very beautiful, and with really nice products. Also, people that drive to use any of the services, they'll have to pay a 20% surcharge, but it won't be, there'll be no surprises, because everything will be advertised that way. And we know that people that drive here because they want to use our services will want to pay the 20% surcharge, because it will be such a great privilege to come and visit our eco village and our business kiosks and our co-op hostel and our public events and so forth. So the other thing is, inside the hall, we will also have various activities. I mean, some days we might be having Zumba or yoga or public talks. We have a big stage inside the hall, and we can show movies. We can also show movies out on the street in our new plaza in a few years. And our kiosks can roll out onto the street and into the neighborhood. So kiosks, businesses, community activities, eco co-op hostel, and to top it all off, an urban, a small urban teaching nursery where we, and plant nursery, where we can have classes in how to do growing food, but not in the ground necessarily, because we have so little ground in this neighborhood. This is the densest neighborhood. This neighborhood is more dense than the New York City, not Manhattan. I'm not talking about, but the whole of New York City. We have greater density in this area that is called the northern part of Koreatown, Wilshire Center, Koreatown, and also historic Filipino town, and also East Hollywood. So depending on, you know, what you want to identify with, we're a neighborhood that kind of is the intersection of all those different neighborhoods I just mentioned. So anyway, people will be able to come and enjoy themselves, see a movie, shop for things that are meaningful and not just consumerist trash, and learn how to garden in pots, as I said, because there's so much asphalt and concrete, and so little space for people to actually garden. So we can teach people how to garden effectively in pots. Also, the other topper offer for the property is, because it's an old auto shop, it's a brownfield. And that means that it is, brownfield, as many of you know, is any property that is either polluted or it's perceived to be polluted. Well, our property is polluted, and we have had many environmental site assessments, and we know for the most part where the pollution is. And we have an arrangement now with UC Riverside's Department of Environmental Toxicology and an extraordinary PhD scientist who is going to do the research on our site to learn how to remediate heavy, not only the organic materials, which are pretty easy to remediate with bio and phytotechnology on microorganisms, but the heavy metals is what her research is also going to focus on. Are there ways that we can actually break down heavy metals? I mean, you can't break them down, but you can render them harmless in a way with some of the research she's going to do. The reason for that is that we want to aim toward creating public policy that will essentially, and ultimately regulations. We have thousands of brownfields in Los Angeles, and as our energy moves more and more toward renewables, we'll have thousands more with gas stations, auto repair shops, and all of that sort of thing. How are we going to help neighborhoods do the remediation themselves in a way that is safe and is effective? And so that's what this research is aimed toward. So anyone that wants to learn more about that, let me know. We'll keep you updated on our website.
Lois, that is an enormous amount of activity going on there. I was going to ask you something, a question that you would have answered just exactly like what you did. You have community relations, you're involved with land use, there's a business aspect to it, you're reclaiming space from cars, reducing ecological footprints, and a lot of, I'm sure, wonderful relationships and friendships, both within your community, but of course, beyond the community. I think that's just a real inspiration of what you and your friends are doing there. And it's so important that every city has places like what you're doing, and you can, people can adapt and learn what your experience has been to where they live. And of course, in a couple months, I think we're doing another eco village conversation, which will be with Enright Ridge in Cincinnati. Of course, as you know, what you're doing is not unique. And you have, tell us, just comment on this. I know that there's networks and associations and relationships cross country and all over the world about eco villages and building community, intentional community. Just say a little bit about that.
Well, of course, first off, I want to say that there is a global eco village network, and you can learn about that. Those of you who don't already know it, go to the website ecovillage.org. And there are 5 regions around the world that are networks of eco villages. Ours is Global Eco Village Network -US, or Gen-US. And you can go to their website, gen-us.net. And also I'm on that board, and we are the publishers of Communities Magazine, which some of you are familiar with. So please give it a look, because Communities Magazine is a most amazing publication. So let's see, where was I? Why am I telling you this? Oh, yes. Then of course well, next month is my 84th birthday. I'm so excited. But next year we're going to have a big celebration. So if you want to come to it, send me an email. Let's see. There's the Co-Housing US organization, which is also a network, and the Foundation for Intentional Communities, the IC.org website, which is a marvelous resource for learning about every kind of intentional community that many of you here today are totally familiar with, but some of you may be newcomers to it. So the resources on that page are quite wonderful. And of course, Diana Leaf Christian, who wrote the 2 most popular books recently on intentional communities. Finding Community was one book, and the Creating a Life Together is the other one for founding eco-villages and intentional communities. So lots of, and now she's teaching sociocracy, which is a great, more efficient decision-making process than consensus. So those are some of the organization. Now, one thing I don't think I actually mentioned, and I really don't want anyone to go away not knowing this, even though CRISP, Los Angeles Eco Village Institute, is who you're talking to, which I represent, we spawned the limited equity housing co-op that owns two of our buildings, the Urban Soil Tierra Urbana Limited Equity Housing Co-op. And what happened is we donated the land underneath those two buildings to the Beverly, Vermont Community Land Trust, which we also spawned some years ago, which now those two organizations are independent of CRISP and LAEVI, aside from the fact that LAEVI holds the mortgages on two of the buildings, which we sold to them for like way under market value, of course. And then the land trust owns 100% the fourplex on the corner and manages the learning garden across the street. And we are in the process now of seeing if the co-op, the co-op might be able to acquire the fourplex across the street from the land trust. So again, the ownership of the building can be separated from the ownership of the land, which helps it remain permanently affordable. A lesson I learned very early on to do that. Sorry.
That's a lot of complicated content right there. So we've been talking for quite a while. This has been a wonderful conversation. Just pause for a moment. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? Is there something that we need to know before we come to our conclusion?
Well, I have a few handouts. So if anyone wants to get any of them, just email me at lois@ic.org. Lois, Lois @ic.org. I have a handout, how to start an eco village in your neighborhood, if you are not already familiar with that. I have a really interesting, and if you go on our website, laecovillage.org, and you pull down the CRISP LAEVI menu, you can get updates on our property next door, what's going on, and what's planned and how far we are, and a lot of things. And also feel free to write me with any of your questions and or discussions, and I'm happy to kind of hang out with you anytime. We can even Zoom.